Who would want to harm our Nwanneka? The dibia's gaze seemed to pierce through them as he replied, "The one responsible is someone who loved her dearly to a fault. The spirits speak of misplaced vengeance and unintended consequences." As they left the dibia's dwelling, Mazi Akubueze and Obidia's minds reeled with the implications of what they had learned. The idea that someone who loved Nwanneka could be responsible for her suffering was almost too much to bear. On the long walk back to Obiuku, they discussed the dibia's words in hushed tones. "Could it be me?" Mazi Akubueze wondered aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "I love her so much, perhaps too much. Could my love have somehow brought this curse upon her?" Obidia squeezed her husband's hand. Her eyes filled with a mixture of love and concern. "No, my husband. Your love for Nwanneka is pure. This cannot be your doing." As they neared the village, the couple agreed to keep the details of the dibia's revelation to themselves for the time being. They needed time to process the information and decide on their next steps. Mazi Njioku, troubled by his inability to understand why Mama Ejike remained healthy and active despite their confrontation, decided to consult his trusted dibia. The dibia revealed a chilling truth. The charm had afflicted the person Mazi Njioku loved the most instead of the intended victim. On his way home, lost in thought, he pondered aloud, "Just as Mazi Akubueze loves Nwanneka, I deeply cherish my last child, Amara. Yet, she shows no signs of illness. Could the spirit have spared her?" One fateful afternoon, while both families were weighed down by their struggles, Amara developed a severe fever. The alarming progression of her condition filled the entire community with dread. First, it was Nwanneka. Now it was Amara. Her parents, desperate for a cure, sought help from one dibia to another, but to no avail. The fever worsened daily, and no remedy seemed effective. One day, as Mama Amara returned from the dibia's hut with her child on her back, a passerby noticed something unusual. "Mama Amara," the woman called out, "your child has fallen asleep and her cap has slipped off. Let me help you fix it." As the woman approached to adjust Amara's position, she froze. The child was lifeless. Unable to break the devastating news, she insisted on helping carry Amara home. Mama Amara, noticing the heavy silence from the women accompanying her, grew uneasy. Her repeated questions about what was wrong were met with downcast eyes and muted responses. Finally, she looked at her child and realized the truth. Amara was gone. Her cries of anguish echoed through the village as she struggled to accept her loss. That evening, Amara was laid to rest. Mazi Njioku, consumed by guilt, began to suspect he was the cause of his daughter's death. Meanwhile, Mazi Akubueze was tormented by the thought that he might be responsible for Nwanneka's mysterious illness. As time passed, Nwanneka's condition showed no improvement. While her peers moved on to secondary school, she remained bedridden, unable to attend classes due to her debilitating health. 2 years of unsuccessful treatments led the family and even the villagers to resign themselves to her fate. The dibia prescribed painkillers to alleviate her suffering, but her condition continued to deteriorate. The rashes worsened, spreading further and deepening into her skin. Then, one sweltering afternoon, a family friend of Mazi Akubueze, a fisherman known for traveling to neighboring villages, arrived with a sliver of hope. "In a distant village," he said, "there is a renowned dibia with a cure for ailments like this. He holds the secret to healing in his hands." Before dawn the next day, the family set out on the arduous journey. When they reached the dibia, he confirmed what others had said, but added a dire prophecy. "Nwanneka has a strong spirit, that is why she endures. But unless the one responsible for her plight confesses, the medicine will remain ineffective. Even then, she may never fully recover. The illness has already scarred her." Mazi Akubueze, his heart heavy with despair, vowed to confess his guilt to the entire community, even though he was uncertain of his own role. just to see his daughter's health restored. Meanwhile, in Obiuku, life had taken on a surreal quality. The once bustling village seemed to move in slow motion, as if the weight of Nwanneka's illness pressed down upon every inhabitant. Children played their games half-heartedly, their laughter muted and infrequent. Adults went about their daily tasks with a distracted air, their minds never far from the suffering child and her distraught family. Mazi Akubueze, consumed by guilt and fear, had become a shadow of his former self. He spent his days in a state of anxious anticipation, jumping at every sound and avoiding eye contact with his neighbors. His nights were plagued by vivid nightmares in which Nwanneka, her body covered in boils, pointed an accusing finger at him. Even Mama Ejike, the village's notorious troublemaker, seemed subdued. Her usual tirades had given way to muttered comments and worried glances towards the Akubueze compound. Some in the village whispered that perhaps she felt responsible for Nwanneka's condition, given her frequent conflicts with Mazi Akubueze. As days passed, rumors began to circulate about Mazi Akubueze and Obidia's visit to the great dibia. Speculation ran rampant about what they might have learned, with theories ranging from the plausible to the fantastical. Some claimed that Nwanneka had been chosen by the gods for a special purpose, while others whispered darkly of curses and evil spirits. The tension in the village reached a breaking point when, several days after their return, Mazi Akubueze called for a gathering in the village square. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dusty ground, the people of Obiuku assembled, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Mazi Akubueze stood before them, his usually proud posture now bowed under the weight of his burden. Obidia stood by his side, her eyes red-rimmed from countless nights of weeping. The crowd fell silent as Mazi Akubueze began to speak, his voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. "My friends, my family, my people," he began, his words heavy with emotion. "For months we have watched our beloved Nwanneka suffer from an illness that defies all earthly remedies. We have prayed to our ancestors, we have consulted healers, and now we have sought the wisdom of the great dibia." A murmur rippled through the crowd at this confirmation of the rumors. Mazi Akubueze raised his hand for silence before continuing. "The dibia has revealed to us that Nwanneka's illness is not natural. It is the result of a charm, a poison meant for another, but which has ensnared our innocent child instead." Gasps of shock and outrage erupted from the assembled villagers. Mothers clutched their children closer while men muttered angrily amongst themselves. In the back of the crowd, Mazi Akubueze felt the blood drain from his face, his worst fears confirmed. "But there is more," Mazi Akubueze continued, his voice rising above the commotion. "The dibia told us that the one responsible for this charm is someone who loves Nwanneka dearly, someone whose misguided actions have led to this tragedy." A heavy silence fell over the gathering as the implications of this statement sank in. Eyes darted from person to person, each villager wondering who among them could be capable of such an act. "I stand before you now," Mazi Akubueze's voice broke with emotion, "to confess that I fear I may be the one responsible." The crowd erupted in shocked exclamations. Obidia, her face a mask of anguish, gripped her husband's arm tightly. "I love my daughter more than life itself," Mazi Akubueze continued, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. "Perhaps my love was too great, too consuming. Perhaps in some way I cannot understand, my devotion to her has brought about this curse." As Mazi Akubueze's words hung in the air, the village of Obiuku stood on the precipice of a profound change. The revelation had shattered the uneasy quiet that had settled over the community, replacing it with a maelstrom of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and profound sadness. Little did they know that this confession was but the first domino to fall in a series of events that would test the very fabric of their community forcing each of them to confront hard truths about love, guilt, and the unintended consequences of their actions. In the gathering darkness, as the stunned villagers tried to process what they had heard, a solitary figure slipped away from the crowd. Mazi, his heart pounding and his mind reeling, retreated to the solitude of his compound. The weight of his secret, already unbearable, now threatened to crush him entirely. As the sounds of the village's turmoil faded behind him, he knew that a moment of reckoning was fast approaching, one that would change everything. In the days following Mazi Akubueze's shocking confession, the village of Obiuku was consumed by a storm of emotions. Whispers and speculations filled every corner, with opinions divided between those who believed in Mazi Akubueze's guilt and those who staunchly defended his innocence. Through it all, one man watched from the shadows, his heart heavy with the burden of a secret that threatened to tear him apart. Mazi had become a ghost of his former self. The once jovial and generous man now skulked through the village like a hunted animal, his eyes darting nervously, avoiding contact with his neighbors. Sleep eluded him, his nights haunted by vivid nightmares in which Nwanneka's accusing eyes bore into his soul, her body twisted and deformed by the curse he had unwittingly placed upon her. During his waking hours, Mazi was trapped in a prison of his own making, his mind a battleground of conflicting emotions. Guilt gnawed at him relentlessly, each passing day adding to the weight of his silent burden. The sight of Mazi Akubueze, a man he had long considered a friend, shouldering the blame for his actions was almost more than he could bear. Yet, fear held him back from confessing. Fear of the village's reaction, fear of losing the respect and affection he had cultivated over the years, and perhaps most potently, fear of facing the consequences of his actions. The memory of his confrontation with Mama Ejike, which had seemed so justified at the time, now filled him with shame and regret. As he went about his daily routines, tending to his yam farm, fetching water from the stream, participating in village meetings, Mazi felt as though he were living a lie. Every interaction, every conversation was tainted by the knowledge of what he had done. The weight of his secret pressed down on him, making even the simplest tasks feel like monumental efforts. One afternoon, as he sat in the shade of a mango tree, lost in his troubled thoughts, a commotion from the direction of Mazi Akubueze's compound caught his attention. Curiosity overcoming his desire to remain unseen, Mazi crept closer to investigate. A crowd had gathered outside the compound, their faces a mixture of concern and excitement. Through the throng, Mazi caught glimpses of Nwanneka being carried out on a stretcher. Her once vibrant form, now frail and covered in angry, weeping sores. Obidia walked alongside, her face streaked with tears, while Mazi Akubueze followed, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "They are taking her to the city hospital," someone in the crowd whispered. "The medicine man from the next village says it's the only hope now." As Mazi watched the procession move slowly down the village path, something inside him snapped. The sight of Nwanneka, the innocent victim of his misguided vengeance, being carried away like a broken doll was more than he could bear. In that moment, the fear that had held him captive for so long was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of remorse and the desperate need to make things right. With trembling legs, Mazi pushed his way through the crowd. His voice, hoarse from disuse, rang out across the village square. "Stop! Please, stop!" The procession halted, all eyes turning to Mazi. He stumbled forward, falling to his knees before Mazi Akubueze and Obidia. "It was me," he choked out, his words barely audible through his sobs. "I am the one responsible for Nwanneka's condition, not you, my friend. The fault is mine alone." A shocked silence fell over the gathering, broken only by the sound of Mazi ragged breathing. Mazi Akubueze, his face a mask of disbelief, took a step towards his friend. "What are you saying, Njoku?" Explain yourself. And so, there in the dusty village square, with the entire population of Obuku as witness, Mazi Njoku poured out his confession. He spoke of his arguments with Mama Ejike, of his wounded pride and desire for revenge. He described his visit to the dibia, the procurement of the Achere charm, and his ill-fated attempt to curse Mama Ejike. With each word, it seemed as though a great weight was lifting from his shoulders, even as horror and anger dawned on the faces of those around him. I never meant for Nwanneka to be harmed, Mazi Njoku pleaded, his voice breaking. She was like a daughter to me. When I realized what had happened, I was too much of a coward to come forward. I watched her suffer, watched all of you suffer, and said nothing. I can never ask for forgiveness for what I've done. But please, please believe that I never intended this. The silence that followed his confession was deafening. The villagers stood frozen, trying to process the magnitude of what they had just heard. Mazi Akubueze's face was a storm of emotion, shock, anger, betrayal, and a flicker of relief at having his own innocence confirmed. It was Obidia who broke the silence. With a cry of anguish, she lunged at Mazi Njoku, her hands clawing at him in grief-stricken fury. You did this to my child. All this time you watched her suffer, watched us suffer, and said nothing. Strong hands pulled Obidia back, but her words seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the crowd. A cacophony of voices erupted, some calling for immediate punishment, others demanding more explanations. Through it all, Mazi Njoku remained on his knees, head bowed, accepting the verbal onslaught as just punishment for his actions. And so, as the chaos threatened to spiral out of control, a commanding voice cut through the din. It was Ezeogo, the village chief, his imposing figure parting the crowd as he made his way to the center of the commotion. Enough, he bellowed, his voice silencing the angry mob. This is a matter that requires wisdom and careful deliberation. Mazi Njoku's actions are grave, but we must not let anger cloud our judgment. For now, he will be confined to his compound under guard while the elders convene to decide his fate. Turning to Mazi Akubueze and Obidia, Eziogo's voice softened. Take your daughter to the hospital as planned. We will deal with this matter upon your return. May the gods grant Nwanneka healing and strength. As Mazi Njoku was led away, the weight of his actions visible in every line of his body, the village of Obuku was left to grapple with the implications of his confession. The revelation had shaken the community to its core, forcing them to confront difficult questions about vengeance, vengeance, forgiveness, and the unintended consequences of their actions. In the days that followed, as Nwanneka fought for her life in the distant city hospital, the village elders gathered to determine Mazi Njoku's fate. The discussions were long and heated, with opinions divided on the appropriate punishment for such a grievous act. Some argued for permanent exile, citing the need to purge the village of the evil that had been brought upon them. Others, remembering Mazi Njoku's years of kindness and generosity, advocated for a more lenient sentence. The debate raged on, mirroring the turmoil that gripped the entire village. As the elders deliberated, the rest of Obuku waited with bated breath. The once tight-knit community now found itself divided, with neighbors viewing each other with suspicion and old friendships strained to the breaking point. The incident had exposed the fragile nature of their harmony, revealing the undercurrents of jealousy, resentment, and misunderstanding that had always lurked beneath the surface. In the midst of this upheaval, there was one person whose voice had been conspicuously absent, Mama Ejike. The woman whose sharp tongue had inadvertently set these tragic events in motion had retreated into an uncharacteristic silence. Those who caught glimpses of her noted that she seemed to have aged years in the space of days, the weight of her indirect role in the tragedy etched deeply into the lines of her face. As the village held its collective breath, waiting for news of both Nwanneka's condition and Mazi Njoku's fate, One thing became clear: Obiuku would never be the same again. The innocence that had once defined their simple village life had been shattered, replaced by a harsh reality that forced each of them to examine their own capacity for both good and evil. The story of Nwanneka, a bright young girl caught in the crossfire of adult conflicts, had become a cautionary tale that would be passed down through generations. It served as a stark reminder of the power of words, the danger of unchecked emotions, and the far-reaching consequences of actions taken in the heat of the moment. As the sun set on another day in Obiuku, casting long shadows across the troubled village, the air was thick with anticipation. Whatever the coming days might bring, be it healing or further heartbreak, justice or mercy, one thing was certain: the village and its people would never view their world or each other in quite the same way again. The weeks that followed Mazi Akubueze's confession were a time of great uncertainty for the village of Obiuku. As Nwanneka fought for her life in the city hospital, the community she left behind grappled with the aftermath of the revelation that had shaken them to their core. In the hospital, Nwanneka's condition remained critical. The modern medical treatments, so different from the traditional remedies she had endured for months, seemed to offer a glimmer of hope. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the angry welts that covered her body began to shrink. The fever that had raged within her for so long started to subside. It was as if, with the truth finally revealed, the curse itself had begun to lose its power. Back in Obiuku, the village elders continued their deliberations on Mazi Akubueze's fate. The discussions were long and often heated, reflecting the divided opinions of the village at large. Some called for the harshest punishment possible, arguing that his actions had nearly cost an innocent child her life. Others, remembering Mazi Akubueze's years of kindness and his evident remorse, advocated for mercy. As the debate raged on, an unexpected voice added itself to the chorus. Mama Ejike, emerging from her self-imposed isolation, came before the council of elders. The usually boisterous woman was subdued, her voice barely above a whisper as she addressed the gathering. "Honorable elders," she began, her eyes downcast, "I cannot remain silent any longer. While it is true that Mazi Akubueze's actions were grievous, I too bear responsibility for what has transpired. My sharp tongue and quick temper provoked him. Had I been more mindful of my words, perhaps none of this would have come to pass." Her admission sent ripples through the assembly. Here was Mama Ejike, known troublemaker of Obiuku, accepting her part in the tragedy. It was a turning point in the deliberations, forcing the elders to consider the broader implications of their decision. After many days of discussion, the council finally reached a verdict. Ezeogo, the village chief, called a gathering to announce their decision. The entire village assembled in the square, an air of tense anticipation hanging over the crowd. "People of Obiuku," Ezeogo began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "we have deliberated long and hard on this matter. Mazi Akubueze's actions have brought great suffering to our community, particularly to the family of Mazi Akubueze. However, we must also consider his years of service to this village, his evident remorse, and the complex circumstances that led to this tragedy." Pausing to let his words sink in, Ezeogo continued, "Therefore, it is the decision of this council that Mazi Akubueze will be exiled from Obiuku for a period of 2 years. During this time, he is to dedicate himself to reflection and atonement. Upon his return, should he choose to come back, he will be required to make amends to the Akubueze family and to our community as a whole." The announcement was met with a mixture of reactions. Some nodded in agreement, seeing wisdom in the balanced approach. Others muttered in dissatisfaction, feeling the punishment was too lenient. But all recognized the authority of the elders' decision. As the crowd dispersed, Mazi was led from his compound, a small bundle of belongings in his hand. His face was a mask of shame and regret as he walked through the village for the last time. As he reached the outskirts, he turned for one final look at the place he had called home for so long. Then, with a heavy heart, he turned and walked into the unknown. The next day, as if the fates had been waiting for this resolution, word came from the city hospital. Nwanneka's condition has stabilized. The doctors, amazed at her resilience, spoke of a recovery that bordered on the miraculous. It would be a long journey back to health, they cautioned, but for the first time since her illness began, there was real hope. The news breathed new life into Obiuku. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from the village. Prayers of thanksgiving were offered, and a cautious optimism began to take root. Months passed, and slowly life in Obiuku began to find a new rhythm. The absence of Mazi was felt keenly, serving as a constant reminder of the events that had transpired. But with time, the raw pain of betrayal began to dull, replaced by a more nuanced understanding of human fallibility. Nwanneka's return to the village was a day of great celebration. Though her body bore the scars of her ordeal, her spirit remained unbroken. Her smile, once thought lost forever, returned, lighting up the faces of all who saw her. She walked with a slight limp, and her once smooth skin was marked with the remnants of the boils that had plagued her. But to the people of Obiuku, she was more beautiful than ever, a living symbol of resilience and hope. The experience had changed Nwanneka in profound ways. Beyond the physical marks, she carried with her a wisdom beyond her years. She spoke often of forgiveness, surprising many with her lack of bitterness towards Mazi. Hatred and anger are poisons too, she would say, and I've had enough of poison to last a lifetime. Her attitude had a profound effect on her parents. Mazi Akubueze and Obidia, who had been consumed by anger and grief, found themselves re-evaluating their own feelings. It was a slow process, fraught with emotional setbacks, but gradually they too began to speak of forgiveness. The incident had ripple effects throughout the community. People became more mindful of their words and actions, acutely aware of the potential consequences. Mama Ejike, chastened by her role in the affair, became an advocate for peaceful conflict resolution. Her transformation from the village troublemaker to a voice of reason was a source of constant amazement and amusement to her neighbors. As the 2 years of Mazi exile drew to a close, speculation ran rampant about whether he would return. Some hoped he would, believing his presence necessary for true closure. Others feared his return would only reopen old wounds. On a warm afternoon, as the sun began its descent towards the horizon, a solitary figure was spotted on the path leading into Obiuku. Word spread quickly, and soon a crowd had gathered at the village entrance. As the figure drew closer, there was no doubt Mazi had returned. He was a changed man. The 2 years had aged him considerably. His hair now streaked with grey, his face lined with the weight of his experiences. He walked with a humility that had never been present before, his eyes downcast as he approached the gathering. To everyone's surprise, it was Nwanneka who stepped forward to greet him. There was a collective intake of breath as she stood before the man whose actions had caused her so much suffering. For a long moment, they regarded each other in silence. Then, in a gesture that would be recounted for generations to come, Nwanneka reached out and took Mazi hand in her own. "Welcome home," she said simply, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed silence. It was a moment of profound healing, not just for Mazi and Nwanneka, but for the entire village. There were tears in many eyes as the impact of the simple act of forgiveness washed over them. In the days and weeks that followed, Mazi worked tirelessly to make amends. He labored in the fields of those he had wronged, shared the wisdom he had gained during his exile, and became a living example of the transformative power of remorse and redemption. The story of Nwanneka, Mazi and the village of Obiuku became legend, passed down through generations as a tale of caution and hope. It spoke to the dangers of unchecked anger and the unintended consequences of our actions. But more than that, it was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the healing power of forgiveness. Obiuku was forever changed by the events that had transpired. The scars remained, both visible and invisible, but they served as a reminder of the lessons learned. The village emerged stronger, more united, and with a deeper understanding of the complexities of human nature. At the heart of it all was Nwanneka, the young girl whose suffering and subsequent forgiveness had become a catalyst for change. She grew into a woman of great wisdom and compassion, her influence extending far beyond the boundaries of Obiuku. Her story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human capacity for healing and forgiveness can light the way forward. As the years passed and Obiuku continued to grow and change, the legacy of those tumultuous events remained. It was a legacy not of bitterness or revenge, but of understanding, growth, and the enduring power of community. And in the laughter of children playing in the village square, in the warm greetings exchanged between neighbors, and in the wise counsel of the village elders, the spirit of that hard-won wisdom lived on, a testament to the indomitable spirit of Nwanneka and the people of Obiuku.